I had been out of work for weeks, bills piling up on my kitchen counter like a slow-building avalanche. And every time I opened my mailbox, I felt that familiar dread creeping in. The classified ad had caught my eye because it was simple, straightforward, and promised more money than I had any right to hope for. Night janitor needed at Grangewood Industrial Complex. High pay, no experience necessary. Immediate start. I dialed the number immediately, not caring about the oddities that should have raised red flags. Who pays that much for a janitor job? But I was desperate, and I told myself it didn't matter. The phone was answered after one ring by a man whose voice was unsettlingly calm, like he knew I would call. He didn't ask any questions, just told me to show up at 9 p.m. sharp and gave me the address. The last thing he said before hanging up was, "There are rules. Follow them." That's it. No small talk, no explanation. Just follow them. The address took me to the outskirts of town, far past where any sensible person would live, surrounded by thick woods that seemed to swallow up the road. Grangewood Industrial Complex was a hulking, shadowy mass that loomed out of the trees like some forgotten relic from another time. The parking lot was almost completely empty except for one old, beaten-up truck parked near the far end. There were no lights on outside except for a single flickering street lamp that cast long, wavering shadows across the lot. The whole place felt wrong, but I pushed that feeling aside. I needed this job. When I stepped out of my car, the air was heavy and damp, pressing in on me as if the entire world had been holding its breath. The building itself was massive, a monolith of concrete and steel that seemed to stretch endlessly into the night sky. The windows were grimy, and the few that weren't boarded up were covered in dust so thick you could barely see through them. The door at the front was rusted, creaking loudly as I pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick, stale, and musty, like the place hadn't been used or cleaned in years. I was about to call out to see if anyone was around when I spotted it. A piece of paper taped to the wall just inside the entrance. "Welcome to Grangewood Industrial." The words were scrawled in a messy, almost childlike handwriting. Beneath that was a list of rules. At first, I thought it was just a list of cleaning tasks, but as I read through it, my stomach twisted. 1. Start your shift at exactly 9 p.m. Do not arrive early. Do not be late. The clock on the wall showed 8:58. I had 2 minutes to spare. I stood there, staring at the second hand ticking forward. Felt strange, almost like a countdown. The whole place was eerily quiet, not even the hum of electricity in the walls. At exactly 9 o'clock, I heard a distant chime, like the toll of an old bell, and suddenly the overhead lights flickered to life. 2. When walking through the main hallway, keep your eyes on the floor. Do not look up. No matter what you hear, this one struck me as odd. Why couldn't I look up? I laughed nervously to myself, trying to brush off the uneasy feeling crawling up my spine. I figured it was some sort of prank or an attempt to mess with the new guy, but I couldn't shake the cold weight settling in my chest. 3. If you hear footsteps behind you, do not stop walking. Do not turn around. I felt my heart rate spike as I read that, my skin prickling with fear. This had to be a joke, right? I folded the paper and stuffed it into my pocket, deciding that whoever had written this was just trying to scare me. But something in the back of my mind kept nagging at me, whispering that this was serious. I grabbed the set of keys from the front desk, each one labeled for different parts of the complex. The silence pressed in around me as I walked through the dark, empty halls. The lights overhead flickered constantly, casting strange, jittery shadows on the cracked concrete walls. The main hallway stretched out in front of me, long and narrow, with doors on either side leading into the various parts of the building. As I walked, I kept my eyes fixed firmly on the ground, remembering the second rule. I told myself it was stupid, but something deep inside me urged me to follow the rules, just in case. My footsteps echoed loudly in the empty space, the sound bouncing off the walls in strange ways that made it hard to tell where the sound was coming from. Every so often, I thought I could hear something, a soft shuffling noise behind me, or a faint whisper carried on the stale air. But I didn't stop. I didn't turn around. I just kept walking, my heart hammering in my chest. 4. The supply closet on the 3rd floor must remain locked at all times. If you find it open, leave immediately. I hadn't been to the 3rd floor yet, and I had no intention of going there now. As I continued down the hallway, I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, like I was being watched. My breathing grew shallow as I hurried along, trying to shake the feeling. I was almost at the end of the hall when I heard it. Soft, barely perceptible at first, but unmistakable. Footsteps. They were faint, almost like the sound of bare feet padding against the cold floor. My entire body went rigid, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would burst from my chest. I could feel sweat trickling down the back of my neck as the footsteps grew closer, but I forced myself to keep walking, my eyes locked on the floor. The sound followed me, growing louder with every step until it felt like whoever or whatever was right behind me, so close I could almost feel their breath on my neck. But I didn't stop. I didn't turn around. Do not stop walking. Do not turn around. I repeated the words in my head like a mantra, my legs trembling with every step. When I finally reached the end of the hallway, the footsteps stopped and the oppressive silence returned. I let out a shaky breath, wiping the sweat from my brow. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the list of rules, my hands shaking as I unfolded it again. 5. If the phone in the main office rings, do not answer it, no matter how long it rings. I looked up, spotting the main office just ahead of me. At the bottom of the page, there was a sentence written in big, bulky letters. Do not let it find you. Do not give in to despair. I combed my trembling fingers through my hair, trying to figure out what the hell this meant. The door was slightly ajar, and the dim light from inside cast long shadows across the floor. As I stepped inside, the old rotary phone on the desk immediately caught my eye. It was ancient, with the receiver caked in dust, like it hadn't been touched in years. I was about to turn away when, without warning, the phone rang. The sound was deafening in the otherwise silent room, shrill and jarring. My heart leaped into my throat as the ringing continued, each tone echoing through the empty halls. My first instinct was to pick it up, to silence the noise, but the rule echoed in my mind. Do not answer it. The phone kept ringing, an incessant, grating sound that set my teeth on edge. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay still, to ignore it, but it was like the phone knew I was there, daring me to pick it up. The ringing grew louder, more urgent, filling the room until it felt like it was coming from inside my own head. I squeezed my eyes shut, my body shaking with fear, and waited for it to stop. After what felt like an eternity, the ringing abruptly ceased, leaving an eerie, suffocating silence in its wake. I opened my eyes, my heart still racing, and looked at the phone. It sat there, silent and unmoving, as if it had never rung in the first place. I swallowed hard, taking a shaky breath, and left the office, the list of rules clutched tightly in my hand. My next task was to clean the main stairwell, which connected all 5 floors of the complex. The stairs were old and creaky, the kind that groaned with every step, and the dim lighting made it hard to see more than a few feet in front of me. As I reached the 2nd floor landing, I noticed something strange. One of the doors leading into the 2nd floor offices was open, just a crack. I froze, my blood running cold as I remembered the 4th rule. The supply closet on the 3rd floor must remain locked at all times. If you find it open, leave immediately. This wasn't the 3rd floor, but the sight of the open door sent a wave of dread through me. I hesitated for a moment, debating whether I should investigate, but then I heard it, a soft, childlike giggle coming from behind the door. My heart skipped a beat, and I turned and bolted up the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. The laughter echoed behind me, growing fainter as I climbed higher and higher, until it finally faded away. When I reached the 3rd floor, I was out of breath, my legs shaking from the adrenaline. The hallway stretched out before me, lined with doors, dimly lit by a single flickering bulb at the far end, casting long, distorted shadows across the cracked concrete floor. My footsteps were quiet now, cautious, as the oppressive silence pressed in on me from all sides. I kept my eyes down, my heart pounding in my chest as I made my way down the corridor, trying to shake off the lingering sound of that childlike giggle from the 2nd floor. But something was off, more than before. The air here felt thicker, heavy with a kind of malevolence I couldn't quite describe. Each step I took seemed to echo unnaturally, like the walls were bending the sound back at me. The cold seeped into my bones, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I clutched the cleaning cart tighter, pushing it slowly, forcing myself to focus on the task ahead. But then, halfway down the hall, I heard it. A wet, slithering noise, like something crawling along the floor. My stomach twisted, and every instinct in me screamed to run, but I stayed rooted to the spot, fear locking me in place. The sound grew louder, more distinct, until I could hear the unmistakable scrape of nails or claws dragging across the concrete. I swallowed hard and forced myself to look ahead. At first, I couldn't see anything, just the same empty corridor stretching out in front of me. But as I strained my eyes in the dim light, something shifted at the edge of the shadows near the far end of the hallway. Something was moving, its silhouette barely visible in the flickering light. My breath caught in my throat as it slowly crawled into view. It was hunched over, moving on all 4s like some twisted, grotesque animal. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched unnaturally over a too-thin frame, and it had no facial features. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just a smooth, blank surface where its face should have been. But it was its movements that terrified me the most. The way its limbs bent in all the wrong places, like it had never learned how to move like a human. Its arms were impossibly long, with hands that scraped the ground as it pulled itself forward, while its legs, bent and twisted, moved in an erratic, jerky motion, as if it was struggling to remember how to walk. I froze, unable to tear my eyes away from the creature, my heart hammering in my chest. It hadn't seen me yet, at least I hoped it hadn't, but it was moving, crawling slowly down the hallway, coming closer, its head twitching from side to side, as though it was searching for something. My mind raced, every fiber of my being screaming at me to run, but I couldn't move, couldn't even breathe. I knew if I made the slightest sound, it would hear me, couldn't let it hear me. The creature stopped suddenly, its head snapping up, though it had no eyes to see with. I could feel its attention shift, locking onto me, and I held my breath, my body tense and trembling. It cocked its head to the side, as if listening for something, and for a terrifying moment, I thought it had found me. I thought I was done for, but then, slowly, it turned its head away and continued crawling forward, its movements slow and deliberate, every scrape of its nails against the floor sending a chill down my spine. I waited, not daring to move until it had passed, its pale, twisted body disappearing into the darkness at the far end of the hallway. My legs felt weak, my body trembling uncontrollably as I finally let out a shaky breath. I had to get out of here. I had to leave before it came back. But I knew I couldn't just run. I had to follow the rules. I had to stay quiet, keep my eyes on the floor, and finish my shift. I glanced down at the list of rules, my hands shaking so badly I could barely read the words. But the next task was clear. Clean the stairwell leading to the basement. My heart sank. The basement. I didn't want to go down there, not after what I'd just seen. But the rules were clear, and I couldn't afford to break them. Taking a deep breath, I gathered my cleaning supplies and slowly made my way back down the hallway, keeping my eyes glued to the floor, my ears straining for any sign of that thing returning. Every step felt like it took an eternity, but I made it back to the stairwell without incident. The door to the basement was old, rusted, and creaked loudly as I pushed it open, revealing a dark, narrow staircase that seemed to spiral down into the depths of the building. The air that wafted up from below was cold and damp, carrying with it the faint, metallic smell of something I couldn't quite place. I hesitated for a moment at the top of the stairs, the weight of the darkness pressing down on me, but I knew I had no choice. I had to finish the job. Gripping the railing tightly, I started my descent, each step creaking loudly beneath my weight. The further down I went, the colder it got, the darkness closing in around me like a suffocating blanket. The weak light from the stairwell above barely reached the bottom, leaving the lower half of the stairs shrouded in shadows. I could barely see a few feet ahead of me, and every instinct in my body screamed at me to turn back, to leave the building and never come back. But the rules. I had to follow the rules. At the bottom of the stairs was a heavy metal door, scratched and dented, with a padlock hanging from the latch. I didn't have a key for it, but as I reached out to test the handle, I realized it was already unlocked. I swallowed hard, my hand trembling as I slowly pushed the door open. The basement beyond was pitch black, the air thick with a stale, musty smell that made my stomach turn. I fumbled for the light switch just inside the door, and after a few flickers, the overhead lights buzzed to life, casting a dim, yellowish glow over the room. The basement was vast, filled with old machinery and stacks of crates covered in dust. The walls were lined with pipes, some of them dripping water onto the cracked concrete floor. The task was simple: mop the floor, clean up any debris, and lock up before leaving. But as I moved deeper into the basement, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Every shadow seemed to shift and move just out of the corner of my eye, and the sound of dripping water echoed unnervingly in the confined space. I was about halfway through mopping the floor when I heard it again. That wet, slithering noise, followed by the unmistakable sound of claws scraping against concrete. My blood ran cold. It was here. The creature was down here with me. My grip tightened on the mop as I glanced around, my heart hammering in my chest. The shadows seemed to grow longer, darker, and I could hear the sound getting closer. Couldn't run, couldn't scream. I had to follow the rules. I slowly backed up, trying to move as quietly as possible. But every step I took felt deafeningly loud. The creature was just behind the stack of crates now, its long, twisted limbs scraping against the floor as it crawled closer. I froze, my breath catching in my throat as it emerged from the shadows, its blank, faceless head twitching in my direction. I stood perfectly still, not daring to make a sound. The creature's head turned toward me, its featureless face hovering inches from mine. I could feel its cold breath on my skin, its long, clawed fingers stretching toward me. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure it would hear it, sure it would realize I was there. But just as its claws were about to brush against me, a sudden, sharp noise echoed from upstairs, a door slamming shut. The creature jerked its head back, twisting its body unnaturally as it turned toward the sound. In that moment, I didn't wait. I darted back toward the stairwell, moving as fast as I could without making too much noise, my entire body shaking with fear. I reached the door at the top of the stairs and slammed it shut behind me, locking it with trembling hands. The sound of my heart pounding filled my ears as I leaned against the heavy door, desperately trying to steady my breathing. I felt a cold sweat drench my back as I pressed my forehead against the metal surface, hoping the creature wouldn't realize I had escaped. I could still hear it moving down in the basement, a soft scraping sound that echoed ominously in the silence. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to run, to flee the building and never look back. But I knew I couldn't leave. I had to finish my shift. I had to follow the rules. The thought was maddening, a cruel joke, but the lingering fear of what might happen if I didn't kept me rooted in place. I took a deep breath and stepped back from the door, forcing myself to remember the task at hand. I needed to finish cleaning the basement and then get the hell out of there before whatever that thing was found a way back upstairs. I glanced down the darkened hallway leading to the main floor, the shadows creeping along the walls like fingers reaching for me, and I steeled myself to move forward. As I walked back into the basement, I kept my eyes on the floor, the cold concrete beneath my feet reminding me of the stakes. I grabbed the mop again, forcing myself to focus on the task, even as the air felt heavier with every stroke. The shadows danced around me, twisting and warping in the low light, but I kept my gaze down, repeating the rules in my head. The sound of dripping water was almost rhythmic now, and every so often, I thought I could hear faint whispers, hushed voices that seemed to float on the dank air, teasing me, taunting me. I was beginning to lose my grip on reality, the fatigue and fear blurring the lines between what was real and what was just my imagination. I tried to push through it, but each creak of the building felt like a reminder of how alone I truly was, and the laughter of that little girl echoed in my mind, a chilling reminder of the darkness lurking in these halls. Just as I was finishing up, the lights above me flickered violently, and I felt a rush of panic flood through me. The basement plunged into darkness for a moment before the lights flickered back on, casting an eerie glow over the room. My breath quickened as I turned, scanning the room for any signs of movement. That's when I noticed it. Just beyond the stack of crates in the far corner, a dark figure loomed, barely illuminated by the flickering lights. My blood ran cold as I recognized the twisted silhouette of the creature I had seen before, its head cocked to the side, as if it was studying me. I felt paralyzed with fear, my body refusing to move as I watched it crawl closer, its limbs bending in ways that defied nature. Each clawed hand scraped against the concrete floor, producing a sound that reverberated through my chest. I thought of the rules, the command to keep my eyes down and never look up, but I couldn't help myself. I glanced up, locking eyes with the faceless creature, and felt a jolt of terror shoot through me. It moved closer, its long arms stretching toward me as if it wanted to grasp me, to pull me into its twisted embrace. The air grew colder as I stumbled backward, fighting the instinct to flee. I knew I had to escape, but the fear paralyzed me, making it hard to think straight. Just then, a loud bang echoed from above, followed by a cacophony of voices, distant and distorted. It sounded like people arguing, shouting, and the noise brought a flicker of hope. Was it possible someone else was in the building? I had to reach them. I had to get out of this hell. I turned to the stairs, my heart racing as I sprinted toward them, keeping my eyes on the ground, feeling the cold sweat trickling down my back. But as I reached the bottom step, I could hear the creature behind me, its long fingers scraping against the concrete as it pursued me. I pushed myself harder, the adrenaline coursing through my veins as I flew up the stairs, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the confined space. Each step was a race against time, and I could feel the creature getting closer, could almost sense its breath on my neck. I burst through the door to the main floor and slammed it shut behind me, locking it with trembling hands. But I knew it wouldn't hold for long. The creature was relentless. The shouting from above grew louder as I made my way toward the stairs leading to the second floor, my heart pounding as I climbed, praying I wasn't too late. I reached the landing and hurried down the corridor, my mind racing with thoughts of escape. I had to find a way out, a way to escape the madness of this place. As I approached the second floor office, the door I had seen earlier was wide open, and a flickering light spilled out into the hallway, casting strange shadows on the walls. I hesitated for just a moment, the fear gnawing at me, but I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was cluttered with old furniture and boxes filled with forgotten memories. The light was coming from an old lamp in the corner, illuminating a figure hunched over the desk. My heart raced as I stepped closer, desperate to see who or what was there. But as I got closer, the figure turned, revealing a face twisted in agony. The skin stretched tight over its skull, eyes wide and unseeing. It opened its mouth to scream, but no sound came out, just a hollow echo that sent a chill racing down my spine. I stumbled back, the realization hitting me like a cold wave. This was another victim of this place, another soul lost to the darkness that haunted Grangewood Industrial. I turned to flee, but the door slammed shut behind me, trapping me inside with the tortured figure. Panic surged through me as I rattled the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers returned, echoing in my ears, and I could feel the oppressive weight of despair settling in around me. I backed away from the door, my heart pounding as I looked around for another way out. That's when I noticed it. The old supply closet across the room, its door slightly ajar, the darkness beyond it beckoning me. I hesitated, but I knew I had to take a chance. I rushed toward the closet, the whispers growing louder, more frantic as I reached for the handle. Just as I pulled the door open, I heard the unmistakable sound of claws scraping against the floor behind me, and I felt a rush of cold air as the creature entered the room. I threw myself into the closet, slamming the door shut just in time. The darkness enveloped me, and I held my breath, praying it wouldn't find me. I could hear it moving in the room, its long limbs scraping against the walls as it searched for me. The whispers were deafening now, a chorus of lost souls begging for release, and I felt the weight of despair crushing down on me. My heart raced as I pressed my back against the cold, damp wall of the closet, the darkness wrapping around me like a shroud. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the sound, trying to focus on the rules. Do not let it find you. Do not give in to despair. Asterisk, asterisk, I forced myself to breathe slowly, trying to calm my racing heart, but the panic was relentless. I couldn't stay hidden forever. I needed a plan. As the creature searched the room, I felt the urge to fight back, to find a way to escape this nightmare. I waited for what felt like an eternity, my heart pounding in my ears until the sounds began to fade. I carefully cracked the door open just a fraction, peeking out into the room. The creature was no longer there, but I could still hear the distant echoes of those tortured whispers reverberating off the walls, reminding me of the despair that filled this place. I knew I couldn't stay in the closet for long. It would eventually come back. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever lay ahead, and stepped out of the closet. The office was empty now, the shadows lingering like ghosts waiting to be seen, and I quickly made my way to the door, keeping my eyes glued to the ground. I had to find a way out. I reached for the doorknob, twisting it slowly, praying it wouldn't be locked. To my surprise, it opened easily, and I stepped back into the hallway. The dim light flickered overhead, and I could hear the echoes of voices growing louder. My heart leaped with hope. Someone was still here. I rushed down the hall, driven by the desire to find another person, someone who could help me escape. As I rounded the corner, I stumbled upon a group of figures standing in a small cluster, their faces pale and gaunt, eyes wide with terror. They turned to look at me, and I felt a surge of relief wash over me. But as I got closer, I noticed something was wrong. Their mouths moved, but no sound came out. They were trapped in a silent scream, their bodies trembling with fear. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized they were just like the figure in the office, lost souls bound to this place. My heart sank as the reality hit me. There was no one to help. I was alone, surrounded by the remnants of despair, and I had to get out before I joined them. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of tortured souls urging me to flee. I turned and ran back down the hallway, the walls closing in around me as I searched for an exit. I needed to find a door, a way out of this nightmare before it consumed me too. My eyes darted from side to side, the shadows stretching and warping, creating a maze that seemed to twist and turn as I raced through the corridors. Each door I tried was locked, each hallway seemed endless, and the weight of dread pressed down on me. Just when I thought I would lose hope entirely, I saw it. A faint glow at the far end of the hall, a door slightly ajar, inviting me into the light. I sprinted toward it, desperate for an escape, but as I reached for the handle, I heard that sound again, the scrabbling of claws on concrete. It was close, too close. I flung the door open and dashed inside, slamming it shut behind me. The room was small, filled with old equipment and boxes stacked high, but the walls were lined with windows. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to control my breath as I peered through the glass. I could see the creature moving down the hallway, its twisted body creeping closer, and I felt a surge of fear flood through me. I knew I had to act fast. There was no way it wouldn't find me if I stayed here. I needed a way out, a way to escape the terror that haunted this place. As I searched the room for a means of escape, my eyes landed on a window in the far corner, its glass dusty and old. I rushed toward it, praying it wasn't locked. With a quick shove, I pushed it open, the rusty hinges groaning in protest. The outside air rushed in, a breath of fresh air amid the suffocating darkness of the building. I glanced back one last time, and just as I did, I saw the creature peering through the door, its blank face inches from the opening. sniffing the air like a predator seeking its prey. My heart raced as I climbed through the window, desperate to escape the hellish nightmare that had trapped me. I dropped down onto the ground outside, the cool earth grounding me, but I knew I couldn't stop. I had to keep moving. I sprinted away from the building, the sounds of the creature fading behind me, but I could still feel the weight of the darkness chasing me, urging me to turn back. I ran until I reached the edge of the property, my lungs burning and my legs screaming in protest. I dared to look back, and for a moment, I saw it. Standing in the window of the building, watching me with its faceless gaze, a dark silhouette against the flickering lights. I turned and ran, determined to put as much distance between myself and that nightmare as possible, the rules echoing in my mind. But I knew one thing for certain. I would never forget what lurked in that building, the whispers of the lost souls and the terrifying creature that haunted the halls. The night air felt cooler against my skin as I fled into the darkness, leaving behind the horrors of Grangewood Industrial. But even as I ran, I could still hear those whispers calling, a haunting reminder that some places should remain untouched and some entities should never be disturbed. My heart raced with the thought that I had narrowly escaped, but I knew deep down that the terror of that place would follow me, a lingering shadow haunting my every step. As I made my way down the darkened streets, my mind replayed the events, every detail etched into my memory. I had survived, but at what cost? The fear of what lurked behind me and the knowledge that the darkness never truly leaves you settled heavily in my chest, a constant reminder that some nightmares never truly end, even when you think you've escaped.